Welcome to the C.L.U.E Principle, the podcast that shares stories from global leaders on how they leverage and apply empathic curiosity when creating leadership mastery. All right, welcome everybody to the C.L.U.E Principle, and we are at episode number 4, and we have an amazing guest here in episode number 4, Aneace Haddad, and Aneace has a really interesting background. I will let him sort of introduce himself as well as we get into this, but a tech CEO, started a company, an IT company in France, sold it, became a mentor and executive coach, and he's the author of, I think, 4 books. Aneace, is that right?
Yeah.
4 books. And the latest book is this one right here, Soaring Beyond Midlife. And it's a fascinating book, also for me, because I am in my midlife and I want to soar beyond my midlife. So this podcast is going to be just a great session, really drawing in on Aneace's background, which has been significant in running teams, but of recent note, really focusing in on being executive coach, C-level executive coach, and he's going to share those insights with us today. So, Aneace, welcome to the C.L.U.E Principle.
Thank you, Paul. Great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, mate. Absolutely. So, Aneace, maybe let's start. Obviously, we're going to talk about the C.L.U.E Principle, but I would love you to interweave your experiences and thoughts, and of course, I think the material in your book, I'm still reading it, but it really resonates also with the fact that, people going through midlife or have gone through midlife, if you like, and parenthood, they're some of the things that I really picked up on is so valuable. And I think the C.L.U.E Principle probably plays a part in soaring beyond midlife somewhat.
Yeah, I can see a number of the stories that are in the book that when you look at them through the lens of the C.L.U.E Principle, you can kind of see all the elements fitting together there. So yeah, definitely a lot to talk about.
Yes, exactly. So let's start with the C. So the C is about communication and really effective two-way communication. In my experience, this is a highly valuable sort of area of purposely wanting to communicate with someone and not doing it for the sake of it. Can you share some thoughts around, communication for you as a leader of people potentially, but any examples of that the audience could sort of pick up on?
So many tumble around in my head. Which one to grab? Okay. Dealing with rainmakers. So I struggled with that when I was a CEO. Rainmakers bring in a lot of business. The shareholders, the board loves them because they bring in revenue, very valuable. And however, when they turn out to be a little bit toxic, they're difficult to deal with. And I had no idea. I had no clue, pun intended, at the time on how to deal with them. And I completely screwed it up when I was a CEO. And then one of the things that I struggled with after that was what could I have done differently? And now when I'm coaching CEOs that have an issue with a rainmaker, the answer is a lot simpler than anything that I thought of back then. I didn't have an answer back then. And the first one is communicate. I will ask them now, do you know what this person's desire in life is? Do you know what they want next? Do you know what their aspirations are? And they'll usually go, God, no, I've never even thought about that, which is what I would have said back when I was running my company. I have no clue what this person wants. But it would start with that, with communication on that. Should I go through the rest of the L-U-E on this one as I see it, or you want to go slower?
No, let's go slower. Okay. I want to get multiple examples from you with all of the different elements of the C.L.U.E Principle. That would be great. But no, you're absolutely right. That foundation of communication is often, I guess, left at the table. And I've seen, I guess, the pressure of business and go-to-market teams in particular, where I really come from, almost dilute that. It's almost the minority do it. There's pressure in the business to really, I suppose, focus on the fact that communication is an essential part of
Yeah.
leadership.
And we make assumptions. We assume there's no need to communicate on this topic because it's evident what they should be doing. Any normal human being would understand this. So why do I have to assume something different? So there's a lot of judgment that comes in, a lot of assessments, a lot of assumption, whereas in fact, none of those are necessarily true. So the only way you can get to the bottom of it is through communication.
Yes. Yeah, exactly right. Okay. That's great. I think that's great insight on communication. Let's move to the L, which is listening. And of course, this is linked to understanding, which is the U. But listening and active listening, really listening to put yourself in the shoes of the other people. And we talk about empathic curiosity being a fundamental skill that leaders need. Give us your thoughts on listening.
There was, as you say, it's very linked to understanding. I remember the story of a CFO in India, a lady that I was coaching years ago, who had issues with her team leaving. So the turnover in her team was too high. She was brilliant as a CFO, and the board loved her. She really had a great mastery of the numbers and everything. But her people were leaving. The turnover was too high. And she said she wanted to develop her empathy. So kind of jumping to the 3 down. But she said, I want to start with my son. And it turned out, it's actually, this story is in the book. It turns out her 17-year-old son, she was struggling with, was in depression. He was on medication for the depression. And she worked really hard. She was traveling a lot. Her husband had a big job. They had helpers around the house and everything like that. So there was some disconnection. He was an only child. So she decided that the first thing she would do is go home and ask for feedback to her son. And she came at the next coaching session, and this is the listening part. She said, I asked my son for feedback, and he told me, you're my mom. I can't rate you as a mother. But if you ask me to rate you as a cook, I'd give you a 0. So she laughed at first, and then she got angry. She said, why do I have to cook for him? We didn't raise him like that. I've got a big job and all this. She became defensive. It's kind of the automatic reaction. We listen for what we want to hear, and then we get angry when we don't hear. But then she listened. Then she said, maybe he wants me to cook for him. Maybe there's something in the cooking. So she gave the helpers an evening off, started cooking for him, and he started sticking around the kitchen. What are you doing, Mom? She said, I'm cooking for you. We're going to make a nice dinner together. He stuck around. They chatted, and it turned out that there was depression because he used to cook with his grandmother, and she had passed away. So there's something in the family there that was quite profound. So I just clobbered your clue and went all the way through. Her empathy grew because of that. It's just I love that little C.L.U.E. moniker, because it really does run you through these kinds of stories quite quickly.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. I think that what you mentioned there too was that, without listening, to genuinely understand, and some of that was a great example where, it can be tokenism. Sometimes, people are just, for for the sake of it. And, okay, I'll listen to you. You know what? I'm a pretty busy person. Thanks very much. But yes,
tick the box. Now I can tell my coach I listened.
There you go. Tick the box. Yeah, which is terrible. In essence, when people reflect back, I really didn't get what I thought I was going to get then. But okay, I have to work with that. So very challenging. Very challenging.
Yeah. A lot of times we're listening for proof that we already have the right answer. So we're listening for any kind of evidence that would show that we know what we're talking about, and then we just latch onto that. That's what he said. I'm going to latch onto that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly right. Yeah, and I think it's also offering the time to the other person, and and not, I guess, somewhat saying, well, this is what I'm feeling. Oh, okay, let's now understand what you're feeling. And I think that's where, true listening understands, when you've actually got the intention to want to understand the other person, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the you in a bit more detail. Let's talk about understanding and that sort of connection point. Any sort of examples that you might have around the time when you were running your own business and trying to listen, to understand, to make forward momentum in an organization or help other people in the organization grow?
I think it took me a long time to understand what our clients really wanted. Our clients were banks, credit card issuers. So the software that I designed was for the chips that are in the payment cards. And at the time we were just moving to chip cards. This is old days. Now everybody's got chips in their cards, but at the time it wasn't sure that the world was going to go in that direction. And we had software, value-added marketing software that sits in the chip. So it would bring in real-time marketing to the point of sale, which is something unheard of 25 years ago.
Yes.
And I thought that and the banks are paying a lot of money. These are €1 million contracts and stuff. It was big software. I thought they were buying some kind of way to enhance the value of their credit cards. Until I started noticing that they wanted exclusivity. They wanted a limited period of exclusivity in their country. So the bank clients were the big, mainly national banks: Maybank in Malaysia, BPI in the Philippines, Barclaycard in the UK, ANZ Bank in Australia. And actually, it took me a very long time to understand that really what they wanted was a way to launch their chip card program that gave a bigger bang to their advertising campaign. Because the banks that did get exclusivity pumped a lot of money into their advertising, much more money than they were paying us for software. But they felt confident that they could really drive out these innovative advertising campaigns that were grounded in our software. And that's what they wanted. They didn't care about the functionality. It happened once in Turkey with a big bank there. I was with my project manager. The two of us were there. There's the CEO of the credit card division and 15 people around him in a big conference room. It was 2 on our side. And the CEO was looking a bit sheepish, saying, but you've come now to sell, but how do I know that you'll be here again when I need you? And I assured him I'll be back. But it struck me, he didn't ask anything about the technology, anything about the functionality and all that. He just wanted to make sure that I'd be there. I didn't hear that. It took me a long time to think back that was a weird situation, and to finally understand that it's because they were going to be putting so much advertising dollars in. They wanted to make sure things were stable and that I'd be there in case things were not. But it was hard to hear that. I just listening through my own lens and everything.
Right. Yeah, I think like in the sales world, a lot of salespeople. There's a lot of great salespeople out there, but it becomes again aligned to pressure. This area of what I'm looking for versus really what the customer is needing. Right? What are their
Yeah,
goals? What are their intentions? And sometimes that takes time. So it's this, discover, 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 discover. And you know
yeah,
what? Discover a bit more, and you know what? You'll start to get the answers that, or the understanding of
yeah,
really the other side of the fence. And it's not about you; it's about them.
yeah. I remember in that period where our sales turned was when I had a dream one night um, of it was a water park, and I had this very, very unique, one of a kind slides for the water park that I had designed.
Right?
And there was a banker person, so obviously a client in my mind, a banker who was there using the water park's normal slide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a representative from the water park was there, and the banker was saying, "What's he got?" And they said, "Oh, that's Aneace. That's his own little special water slide thing." And the banker's looking at me like, "Why would you even spend any energy doing something like that?" And that hit me so hard. It's like I didn't know what kept them awake at night, and I've got this little gadget and
Yes.
I'm trying to sell it, and it actually there's no interest in it because I don't know what's keeping him awake at night. So that was a turning, and I think that's what started to move toward that exclusivity and everything, and understanding at
Right.
a deeper level. So there's emotion involved. What keeps them awake? That became a rallying cry. What keeps
Right.
these people awake at night, and how do I make sure that what I'm providing addresses that? And if it doesn't, if this is not, if the thing I'm providing is not keeping them awake at night, it's not going to fit.
I think that's a great point. It's for people who are listening to the podcast, this opportunity to actually keep asking that question, whether you're in sales or whether you're managing people.
Yeah,
Do you actually can you answer that question? What keeps this awake at night? No,
yeah,
I can't. Well, maybe you should be able to answer that question. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
focus can change. Yeah.
yeah,
Your dream was interesting. The water park, that was it's interesting.
yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. All right, so let's talk about the E of the C.L.U.E principle, which is empathy, and it's really the culmination of communication, listening, understanding, in order to really to get empathy. And I'm sure in your executive coaching world, writing your book, the thoughts that you've had around reflection of clients, because I know that's how you've written the last book, Soaring Through Midlife. What are your thoughts on empathy, and any examples of clients maybe where they're stuck, but this is actually the piece that they've
Yeah,
got to.
I find one thing I find absolutely fascinating doing the research for Soaring Beyond Midlife on the things that change in our brains. One area is our prefrontal cortex is slowing down, so we don't remember details as well as we used to. Not so much in our 40s, but in our 50s, it's starting to come in.
Mhm.
Um, we might not remember the contents of a cell on a spreadsheet while we're presenting to the board, and we'll go, "Oh God, what was behind that cell? I'm going to look stupid in like 10 seconds because I don't know, I don't remember what was behind that cell." And I always used to remember every single bit of the spreadsheet, and that thing just for a moment is escaping me. So that's the prefrontal cortex slowing down. At the same time, the two hemispheres are talking more with each other. There's more communication between them. So we can see patterns and connect the dots easier than we used to when we were younger. We can
Mm.
also sit with paradox and ambiguity more easily because that's what gets handled with having the two hemispheres. We don't have to answer the question um,
Right.
so definitively as we did when we were a little bit younger. And in terms of empathy, the fascinating thing that's linked to all this is our cognitive empathy decreases. So it starts to get difficult to understand other people's points of view. They're
Hmm.
sharing something, we're going, God, I really don't understand what he's talking about. But our emotional empathy increases. So we find ourselves in these situations where we go, I don't understand what he's talking about, but I really get him. I get him on an emotional level. And if we grasp who we were younger and say, I really need to understand him logically and all that, it can break. But if we let go and we say, well, I don't really need to understand everything he's saying. I don't need to understand how he's doing it. I get him emotionally. I'm really connected emotionally. I trust him. I'm really connected with that. There's a lot of power in that empathy moving, where the understanding is maybe less cognitive and more emotional. So then
Right.
you get into situations where you can be with a bunch of people that in your team, especially with senior teams, where they have very different points of view, very different angles, very different ways of looking at things, but you can pull it all together through this kind of emotional empathy that's growing.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've seen there seems to be the conversations that I'm having a focus at a board of director level to understand, well, for them to understand each other
Yeah,
from maybe long tenure, maybe they're an independent director coming from the outside in, maybe you've had short tenure and you've got new, fresh faces sort of coming in. I'm seeing a desire to want to be able to work efficiently, better together, and understand each other.
yeah,
A lot more. Are you seeing the same thing?
yeah, absolutely. And what this research is pointing to is if they limit themselves to understanding each other intellectually, they're going to have a lot more trouble because they come from very, very different backgrounds. Hopefully, they come from different backgrounds because that's what you want in those kinds of environments. But if they then say, okay, let me put aside all my old beliefs so we don't mix business with pleasure and all that board members, we can go out for a drink together or have a meal or something like that, ask about each other's families and what is it you really love. If I go toward that, then the understanding becomes more emotional, and I can create these bonds even if I am having trouble understanding them cognitively.
Yes, yes, yes. It's refreshing. I think when you find those situations, of course, they're not everywhere. That as a focus for organisations or people or groups, but when you can start to get them sort of understanding that, and I'd like to sort of tie in here self-awareness, which we should be calling this the clues principle, but it's still the clue principle. But we're added self-awareness from our good friend Karen Stein. But I think it's really important because it's almost the state that you require individuals to be in, and really have that ability to self-reflect and understand where they are. And again, if I think about your book, Soaring Through Midlife, that seems to be more prevalent in the second half of someone's journey than earlier. Would I be right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's really, I think, the if you were to distill the message that comes out of that book is our brains are functioning differently as we age, and we need to adapt to that and leverage the superpowers, the beautiful new stuff that's coming in, while at the same time dealing with some of the other stuff like the prefrontal cortex slowing down. So in a
Mm,
sales environment, you might want to surround yourself with people whose prefrontal cortex is still going really strong in their 30s, maybe early 40s, and make sure you're not competing with them on that stuff. So that awareness, I think, is extremely powerful. Knowing that it's not just incremental. We're not
mm,
incrementally growing in experience. There's something very different that changes when we slip into midlife.
yes. What I see is when you can actually do it, your awareness, and when you and I caught up last, I was talking to you about my mindset's all about like early in career people and attracting that generation who are totally absorbed to millions more information than you and I were, but giving them the opportunity. So it's this mindset change for me was how do I need to spend the time to understand these people, because to your point, I'm not growing like that, but I could actually be a more effective leader if I
Yeah.
embrace what they bring.
Yep. 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 There's when you compare the two, well, looking at 20 to 40s, how the executive brain functions in our 20 from 20 to 40 versus 40 to 60. There are things like a lot faster learning in our 20s and 40s. New information can come in, we can hold on to it faster. 40s to 60s, it's more thriving in complexity and ambiguity. We're more comfortable with that. 20s and 40s, it's best to have clear step-by-step guidance, kind of a hierarchical environment. If people thrive in that a bit more. 40s and 60s, it's more flexible, innovative, a lot more room for different things, different connections to come in. So it's very different. And when you structure for those differences and you look at where do I get the most value from people in their 40s, 60s versus 20s to 40s, you have much more awareness on how to lead.
Yeah, and I guess embracing that as well. Like we talk about, where I think some people are maybe listening but not necessarily understanding what are those steps. I mean, if we've got people on this podcast who are maybe in that situation, what can you give them some thoughts and ideas about steps that they can take to start that self-awareness journey, but also an awareness of others, right?
I think the first thing is to do a little bit of Googling and do a little bit of research and understand that a bit so that the distinctions can come through. Actually, that's why I wrote my book. That's why there are the three winds of change, the physiological changes that are happening, neurological and the parental that you brought up earlier, how those influence us, how they impact us. And if you're simply aware of these things happening, when you're interacting with someone else and you know where they are on their journey, you can understand better what's emerging in their life. The parental one that you mentioned earlier, I love that one. It is a generalization, but generally people in their 40s, 50s, early 60s, the kids are growing up and leaving home. There are all kinds of exceptions to that, obviously, but when you're aware of that and you look and you're aware of how parenting changes, that when we parent younger kids, we're very KPI driven. If you do this, that'll happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. And we know that teenagers, it's harder to do that. Early 20s, it becomes impossible to do that. So you can't keep parenting the same way. You're forced at some point to learn how to be valuable as a father or a mother without fixing things for people. So you kind of organically learn to be inspiring and empowering. And we don't all manage to do it, because a lot of us can screw up royally for a very long time. But the vast majority of us do kind of get better at that. And if you see that same thing happening in leadership, that as we age, we need to have that same thing. We need to realize these people working for us are not kids. These are all full-grown adults. Many of them have children of their own and families and stuff. So how do we empower, inspire them, rather than use you do this, you get this, you do that, you get that. I can look at a company now and I can tell if the HR department still has a lot of little kids running around at home, not in the HR department. But if they're very KPI-ish and everything, and they look like they want to kind of measure everything, then
Yes.
yeah, okay, you haven't made that shift yet.
Yeah, I think that is a
However,
great,
you're trying to lead a bunch of people who have. So
great. Yeah, I had I've even used I think subconsciously more examples between two of my children who one's proactive, I really don't have that much concern. The other one is not as proactive, but more creative brain. And it's interesting using. I've had to take a step back, because I can't go there with my other child. And it's interesting. Some of the things that I've learned in corporate world actually helped me deal with that as well. So it sort of crosses both sort of hemispheres, right? The professional life into personal and personal into professional. But I must say I struggle with the broader organizations that I work for really investing in the talent and identifying the hidden genius in
yeah,
people. It's Aneace, I've hired you. You're doing a great job, and here's your goals, and well done. You've got your bonus, and everybody's happy. But I don't know. I have this theory that companies could double what they do if they were really, really in touch with the human capital and that hidden genius that they have.
I do this work because I completely agree with you. There's a
Yeah.
lot of value and joy to unlock. One of my big areas of complaint recently is, and you might have seen this on LinkedIn a little bit, is on leadership programs that are mainly designed for people in their 20s and 30s and maybe early
Mm-hmm.
40s, and
Mm-hmm.
then assuming that that same design applies across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you have is you have things that just don't apply at all for people in their 40s and 50s because it just doesn't work anymore that same way. And you're trying to force them through that, and not aware that there are different ways of being with them. So if people can only become aware of that, there's a lot of unlocking that could happen.
Yes, exactly. I agree. All right, so Aneace, it's been great talking with you and getting your insights. I'd love it if you, as we wrap up, any sort of final thoughts or tips or directional type of advice for our listeners out there around leadership, applying the C.L.U.E principle.
I think, God, I don't like giving advice. The only thing there is, with all the change that we're going through and the complexity that we're living in, uncertainty, all the VUCA stuff, the volatility and all that. If you can use the C.L.U.E principle to shift from a resilience kind of mindset. So I've moved away from using the word resilience because it feels too hard. It's kind of
Right.
a reaction to something, and I want to bounce back from something bad that's happened, and then get back to my life as usual. It's kind of like that.
Yes.
And I've coined a term, joyful rejuvenation. We're constantly growing, constantly changing. And if we can be listening more and understanding more and having more empathy, we can kind of surf the waves easier than simply being resilient and bouncing back from a bad thing and then just getting back to normal life after that. So I call that
Yes.
joyful rejuvenation.
I like that.
A longer term than resilience, but I like it better.
I like that. And I think it helps. It puts people into a fresher mindset, right? It's
Yeah.
I think a different approach to thinking about what are the steps that I need to take. Look, Aneace, thank you so much for spending time with us on the C.L.U.E principle. Really appreciate you sharing insights with our audience, and also I'm going to do it again. He hasn't promoted his book once on this podcast, but I am, because this book is actually really insightful, and the way that Aneace has written it with case studies and learnings off the back of it, It's just a great read. And I think coupled with what he's talking about there, it would be a great step if you're in that second half of your journey. It's just a great book and a great read. But again, Aneace, thank you so much for being with us.
Paul.
C.L.U.E Principle.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. A huge thank you to Aneace Haddad. Do search for his book, Soaring Beyond Midlife, on Amazon to support your journey of leadership mastery. See you next time on the C.L.U.E Principle.